Welcome to the Grounded in Peace podcast, where we explore what it means to cultivate peace within ourselves while working toward a more just and harmonious world. Join us as we uncover stories, practices, and ideas that inspire grounded collaborative action for lasting change.
Well, I'm talking with Perry Garfinkel today, who is the author of Becoming Gandhi, My Experiment Living with the Mahatma's 6 Moral Truths in Immoral Times. Welcome, Perry.
Thank you very much. It's a long time coming of our meeting, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, very good. Well, our group, Ashland Center for Nonviolence, we read your book a couple of months ago, and we have a community book club here, and we talked about your book. And I was on study leave in the fall, which is part of the reason I wasn't in touch at all. But you know, we enjoyed your book so much, and this is really a neat opportunity to talk with you about this book and your experiments with these moral practices. Now you've been to, you say in the book that you've been going to India a lot throughout your life, and your first visit to India was in 1973. So talk to me a little bit about the background to your experience writing this book.
Well, if you want to go back to that, I think the initial my initial journey into spirituality really came from my grandfather, who was founder, one of the trustees and honorary chairs of a small synagogue in Queens Village, New York. And I remember going to synagogues with him especially on the high holy days, and I felt that there was something happening. And, it was a kind of contradiction to what was going on around me in the world, now we're talking about the 60s, 50s and 60s, and that I didn't have access to it. It was like happening over there. And I thought I wanted to find a source that brought me into the experience of being surrounded by or in the moment of spiritual awakening. And while I'm Jewish and I'll always be Jewish, I found that actually through Buddhism you can add. It's additive. Mm-hmm. It's not divisive. And when to involve politics a little bit, when Richard Nixon was reelected, and my then wife and I had decided if he got reelected, we're leaving the country. And it's kind of parallel times. Mm-hmm. But we opened a map and we said, where's as far away and as exotic as we can go? And meditation and yoga was in the air. It was like becoming part of the zeitgeist. And we just sort of pointed our finger on India and we decided to go. And that really changed my and her life completely. India is a kind of love-hate relationship. It's what you see going on the streets is sometimes repugnant, but it also opens you to deeper places in yourself that have to do with tolerance, acceptance, embracing the conditions around you, and finding a path to, to find your own way through it. That was as you said, 1973, 74. Our plan was to win the lottery, literally, Craig. We were going to go home to Massachusetts, which had introduced the lottery, and we, bought a ticket every week, and we thought we'd go back and live there for a year. That didn't happen. It took 30 years for National Geographic magazine to assign me a story that I had proposed to do a piece about why Buddhism had grown popular in the West. And I said, the answer lies in the East. So they sent me on a round the world ticket to 8 countries where I saw Buddhism in action in a tradition that Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese monk, called socially engaged Buddhism, which you can say happens in churches around the world and the country where there's soup kitchens and clothing giveaways and active participation in with HIV and marginalized populations. But I saw it through the eyes these eyes, and it further opened me up to what the depths of the experience can be. While in India, of course, I saw lots of images of Mahatma Gandhi. Every the street is named. Many streets are named after him. Every village, there's always a village with the town center and statues of Gandhi. His name is everywhere, but it was peripheral to me. And when I came back, years go by, and that article for National Geographic became a book that I wrote called Buddha or Bust. The subtitle was In Search of Truth, Meaning, Happiness, and the Man Who Found Them All. I was not that man. Siddhartha Gautama was that man. But after that, I was coming up with other ideas, and this Gandhi idea came to the front because Barack Obama was using this famous Gandhi phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. And Obama had attributed much of his path to Gandhi rather than to Martin Luther King, which would have been logical. King, as I later realized, was a great follower of Gandhi. So I thought there was and I put this in quotes, a market. There were people yearning to understand who was this little skinny guy with the John Lennon glasses and the big ears, and see if I could rediscover a way to bring him off of the shelves, the bronze figure off of the shelves, and live a Gandhi life in action as a Western American, Jewish trained, Buddhist informed spiritual expeditionary. And that is the origins of the book idea.
Yeah. That's good. And you weave together. I mean, I love books like this because you weave together so well your own your own thoughts, and then stuff about Gandhi, and then your travels and the places that you went and the people you talked to. It's just a wonderful read.
Thank you.
Our center What's that?
I said, thank you. We can hang up now.
Yeah, no, well, I wanted to zero in on some of the things you wrote, especially about nonviolence. This podcast is called Grounded in Peace, and we're really focused on that. And one of the things that connected with me is when you talk about how satyagraha is really a better term than nonviolence, or versions of that are kind of negatively phrased. And I'll tell you, I think a lot about that, and we talk a lot about that. In fact, Arun Gandhi, who you also talked to, suggested to us when we started our organization 20 years ago that when you spell nonviolence, don't use a hyphen. And he, as a way of gesturing toward, we're trying to move away from this negative conception of or prohibitive conception of what nonviolence is.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit about why, what do you think is added by this kind of positive focus on satyagraha that Gandhi talked about? How is there more to his conception? And as you kind of realized it in your own experience, how is there something more to it than simply negating violence?
Well, and Arun Gandhi, who passed away about 2 years ago, a great man, and he was a journalist for 30 years for the Times of India. So he was very precise with words. And I am too. I've been an editor for my whole life. And I realize, and I'm a psychology aficionado and a student of language, that when you use a non, it first makes you think of the non before you can go to the positive. So in his idea and mine was, let's positivize the idea. And centers for peace, for the study of peace, are what I think is the positivization rather than peace and nonviolence. And I think there are steps, as I hope you'll ask me about, to personally, like separate violence from nonviolence, peace and a positive attitude towards how to live a more peaceful life. But if I may just jump ahead, yeah. I think the more practical way to talk about this is to say what I tried to do when I realized I want to live a happier, positive life and eliminate influence of violence. So I first of all, in a very mundane way, I realize I'm watching too much television and movies that are full of violence. I've been watching cowboys and Indians shoot arrows and guns at each other since I was 6 years old, and you take it for granted. So I reviewed some of the movies that I watched, and I called a personal boycott on movies that contain violence. That's a lot of movies. And even today, when I watch old movies on TV, I keep flipping the channels because there's no films that don't include violence. Mm-hmm. As a writer, we live the dramatic narrative of any story that thrives on dynamic tension. Keyword tension. So there's got to be an us and a them and a black hats and white hats. All of this from my Buddhist informed life is all about dualism, Craig, as you well know. So if we could think in terms of unity and union and that we're all one, that's one step towards living a more peaceful and less violent life. And then I looked at sports. And my mother used to say, watching football, this is like man's inhumanity to man. And I used to rib her about it. And then later, writing this book, I said, oh, I get it, Mom. So I'm a football fan for the aesthetics of bodies doing ballet on a field. So I stopped watching football. And other ways. So another way was the movement called nonviolent communication. Are you familiar with it as your student?
Yeah, I am. In fact, we were hosting a training here in the fall, and that was one of the things I was going to ask you about. So, because you're talking about things you gave up, and then things. I take it nonviolent communication is something you took on, and meditation you also talk about. So yeah, and maybe you can comment on. I mean, say what those things are, but I'd be curious to know too if these are things you've stuck with since you did these experiments.
Yes, thanks for asking that. I would put nonviolent communication, and it's called NVC, and there are centers all over the country now. And I would put it most simply this way: when you communicate with others, don't point fingers. Use the I, not the you. And couples therapy, they talk about this. Don't blame, don't condescend. That is in a nutshell what I've learned from nonviolent communication. And that this is going around a lot. Words have meaning. Words have impact. I think I invoke the phrase, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can do damage. And so it's really about having that kind of awareness, as we learn in meditation, which I'll talk about in a second, of the impact of your words, your behavior, your thought processes. And the other one I called out on myself was how often I curse myself silently for spilling milk. Lately, I'm finding I'm really clumsy in the kitchen. I spilled some coffee beans all over the kitchen. I had to have my cleaning person come specifically. But I let go of the self-criticism. So there's nonviolent communication externally and internally. And we do real damage to ourselves and our and that damage. The phrase I realized you say, I beat myself up about that. Well, there you have it. Intrinsic, inherent in that phrase is violence. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And meditation, I went to my first meditation retreat probably 40 years ago, and it was impossible. I hated it, Craig. My trying to sit lotus position, cross-legged. My knees really hurt. My mind was like the ultimate monkey mind, and I reverted to an old tack that's discouraged, but I counted. I counted breaths. And if I could get to 100, keeping track of the number, I felt like, okay, I'm making little progress. But over the years, I've gotten better at that. And I've read a lot about the impact of breathing on metabolism, on inner peace. So, I'm not anywhere close to enlightened. I'm still crazy after all these years. But I've learned through this meditation practice called Vipassana, which was the one the Buddha quote invented, the original meditation that's now called mindfulness. Couple of slow breaths, watching my breath go in and out, in my nose, out my belly, just slows my heartbeat down. And that is the beginning of finding peace. So that's there. In fact, I'm just reading a book proposal by the editor-in-chief of Lion's Roar, the Buddhist magazine, and he's taking it to another level. He's calling it the complete path to mindfulness, which is the attempt to integrate Buddhist type of meditation and what we would call secular meditation. And that mindfulness, which had been popularized by John Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness-based stress reduction. He tried to take, he took the saffron robes off of Buddhist meditation and called it mindfulness. So it's an everyday kind of practice, but on the deeper spiritual level, I've come to see, as ancients have seen, that when you start emptying the mind, and also distinguishing your thought from you, you come to a peaceful position of non-judgment. Judgment causes strife. Judgment is that dynamic tension. So non-judging mind comes from meditation practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, I'm thinking about how Gandhi, wrote these 2 letters to Hitler, and in both of them, he addresses him, dear friend, and he talks about the British, having a vision the British would leave as friends. And the text of his letters to, especially the second letter to Hitler was, he didn't pull any punches, so it's not like he was friendly all throughout, but he calls him a monster for sure. Yeah. But, I agree with you. These are very important practices, and that's why we're doing nonviolent communication. You said in the book that you swore off, or it took you a minute to swear off of social media, and you say that by the time we read the book, maybe you will have rejoined. So I wanted to ask you if you've rejoined social media since you wrote that.
True confession. Yes, I have joined. I look at it like I look at thoughts moving past me. I'm not attached to conversations that are argumentative or, criticisms. But to be really honest, I kind of got more active when my book came out, and one has to have a quote platform and promote your book. But I go on and I'll see something. I'm mostly on Facebook. But Instagram, I'm not even sure always how to even post a picture. I'm not part of that. That's a growing community. Twitter, I never was a friend of Twitter, and now I'm less so. I have an account, but I never, ever go there. I think it's something, and I want to bring this up before we disappear. I use the word taper. You taper down from, I tapered down from being a meat eater to vegetarian, and now I'm a pescatarian. And I think that, if you can practice doing less of the things that are counterproductive, then you're on the path. You're becoming Gandhi. You never be Gandhi. And it's the same for, what we're just talking about. If I can reduce, it's called stress reduction. I'm just realizing that's it. I call it tapering. So that's sort of my relationship to social media, and the Buddhist piece, which is to watch thoughts as clouds passing by. I don't attach myself to any comment somebody would make. I should say this: as a writer, you get your book reviewed. One review completely panned my book. And it was an Indian writer in a pretty well-known newspaper. And for a few days, I grumbled and rumbled and, chewed my inner lip about it. And then I thought, nah, and then, of course, the worst case scenario is where you say, oh, he was right. This book sucks. It was too superficial. But I have to put it in a perspective that I've learned that he's an Indian in India. They hold Gandhi very precious. My Indian editor, Simon and Schuster India, were reluctant to have me use humor. Humor is my, middle name, and it comes from a long history of Jewish comedians. But I would never make fun of Gandhi himself. It was all self-effacing humor. So that's what I would say about less. Less is. It turns out from years of practice, less is more.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like a friendlier way to be to conceive of ourselves, and in not all or nothing terms or black and white terms. Tapering, or noticing the thoughts and not beating ourselves up for having them while we're trying to clear our minds or something like that. There was an interaction you had in the book with, and I went back, I couldn't find where, I'm sure you remember it, but someone challenged you on your project, and I forget if the language was like this person felt like it was wrong to appropriate Gandhi in the way that you were, or something like that. But anyway, I wish I could find that, but I did. I wonder what your thoughts are, kind of broadly, and if other people have pointed out this, that you're, the way that you're using Gandhi is in this kind of self-help fashion. Do you have your own sort of misgivings or ways of, talking about your project and as having done that?
I have no misgivings about it. In fact, from the get-go with my publisher, Sounds True, I was clear in my proposal that I didn't want this to be a how-to self-help book. I wrote one of those back in the 80s when these pop psych books were popular. But at the end of it, my editor read the book in manuscript form, and she liked it a lot. And she said, what I really would think or hope you could do is at the end of each chapter, sum up, what you just said. And I, to myself, Craig, I said, she wants me to write a self-help book. And so when I wrote those end of chapters, I said, how to Gandhi simply, how to Gandhi nonviolently. And it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, tip of the hat to her. But there is something useful to learn and use, and it's. I mean it. I meant my book to be a tool. The criticisms you vaguely remember in the beginning of my book, I had a friend, American, an Indian, who came to America and went to school, and she said, "How dare an American try to write a book about Gandhi?" And my response to her was, "It's not a book about Gandhi." And I want to be clear to your listeners. It's about how to take the principles that Gandhi proposed and live them in your daily life. How much of this I've lived today? I'm still tapering, Craig. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've slipped into some of the old ways, but I'm well aware of them. And then just finally, I had an interview I guess it's toward the end of the book. I was in South Africa, and I interviewed a sociologist who had himself an axe to grind against Gandhi being turned into a hero and a martyr. And at the end of the interview, at the end of every interview with, people expert in the field of Gandhi or Gandhian economics, I ask, well, how do you personally follow the 6 principles? And his response was, "That's so American of you. That's so I, me, my, and so egotistical." And what he said, and just to bring it around, he said, "These are not Gandhian principles. These are universal ideals, and every religion, every valuable belief system has these basic principles at heart. So to call it Gandhi's principles is a bit overstated." And I completely understood it, but it sort of ended the interview, but on a positive note.
Yeah. That's what I was remembering. Okay.
The last one I just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. In your nonviolence chapter, you cite someone who wrote in 2017 an article, "We Can Neither Win Wars or Win Elections," and you were dealing with, and a couple of pages about the idea that maybe nonviolent protest is not as effective now as it once was. And you mentioned Occupy Wall Street and the Black Lives Matter movement. Could you say more about that? I mean, is that your belief? Because you cite someone to that effect. Thoughts on that as you look at the world, and is nonviolent protest not what it used to be?
The Wall Street protests started nonviolently. The police came in and tried to kick them out, and that's when things got violent. I feel that to make a comparison to Jesus and Buddha, founders of these movements begin with a very pure intention, and then something on the more base human ego level causes conflict among the second tier. The Buddha's disciples, the 8 disciples, and the gentleman sitting around the table at the Last Supper after the passing of Christ and after the passing of Buddha, there begins this attempt to interpret the wisdom of the founders, and then it causes divisiveness. I think that's the flaw. I mean, the human condition kind of creates the dilemma. It seeks the answer and then creates its own, confusion and conflict to follow the path of the founder. Today, I feel that our country particularly is so divided that, as I said before, it goes back to what I experienced in the 70s when your freak flag, as it was called, was the long hairs versus the short hairs. But it's not constructive and doesn't move towards peace and nonviolence. Arun Gandhi, if you remember in my book, he said, "Violence is inherent in man." That was very chilling acknowledgement from the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. And I think what I also learned in Buddhism, when you talk about Buddha nature, It's not, you're not sitting on a rose-colored cloud on a zafu and up in the sky. It is all encompassing. We have our good side and our bad side, and our goal in life is to move toward the good. And that's what becoming Gandhi is really an attempt to show that every day you have an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Look at what you maybe didn't do right yesterday and do it better today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I really liked about your book was, and maybe this is a partial response to the person you were talking to in South Africa, or how I might respond along with you, is that, you're focusing on personal things, and these personal things branch out into social things and so on. And, I guess it would have been a really different book if you'd said, I'm going to take on, these social practices, nonviolent, or community organizing or something like that. But you started with the person, and I think that's, that I don't know. I'm not about to say that that nonviolent protests are failing now because there's a failure of the personal, but I mean, I do anecdotally observe that. And I was talking to a Quaker woman who joined a pro-Palestinian rally, and it was technically nonviolent, but the people were so full of hatred that she felt very uncomfortable, and she said to me, it seemed violent, and so that's just kind of interesting. I mean, it wasn't physically violent, but she had a different spirit going into that. So, I mean, do you connect with that? I mean, am I speaking your language at all in terms of you clearly went for personal practices, or not just practices, but like truths, but that can be practiced.
Yes, and it's partly because for a couple of reasons. I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books about Gandhi and about his theories and principles, and they seem to be at arm's length from the actual practice. So I made myself a guinea pig, and so yeah, it was personal. And as we used to say, and somewhere maybe out there they're still saying, the political is personal and the personal is political. So
I thought you were going to say, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. I mean,
don't get me rewrite. But it is a personal practice, and I know that I can take criticism for that, but somebody's got to try it. That's the key word in the subtitle of my book is experiment, and Gandhi had written, my life is my message. And so I try to do that. But now that you're saying this, I was just thinking that, when we have these two sides trying to, there really is conflict there, not resolution. And what they need is a facilitator, somebody who can be the objective and say, you have a point, and just like a referee in a boxing match, break, you're strangling each other. That's not really getting to a solution. It's these groups could take advantage or benefit from a facilitator who can just say, you're using violent communication skills of pointing fingers. Let's turn the finger back at you. So it's protests in the streets. They can run amok with hatred, staunch positions, entrenched positions, and I'm not sure that somebody said, let's have a protest and create an open dialogue.
Right. Yeah, that's not really the spirit of these. But I remember Thich Nhat Hanh, or reading him somewhere, saying that he didn't take sides because if you take sides, you can't act as a mediator.
Right.
Which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
The opposition to, or the critiques of Gandhi, I wanted to ask you about. Did you know going into this project the level of criticism that Gandhi receives? I mean, going back to his assassination, the guy who killed him wrote why I killed Gandhi, and he says Gandhi wasn't the father of India; he was the father of Pakistan. And so and I will admit I don't know a whole lot about all of the politics involved there, but you do wonder, because I was asking a minute ago about is nonviolent protest failing now? Is there a sense that Gandhi's nonviolent approach, as successful as we talk about it being, was incomplete? What are the flaws there if it leads to the kind of criticism of his, or the kind of disunity that India feels or many people in India feel is part of his legacy?
Yes, I was well aware of that part. I was not aware of the other criticisms of him that we'll put aside for the moment. But it's the Muslims and the Hindus have been at war with each other for generations. I often have asked myself that old question about Gandhi: did man make history, or did history make man? Gandhi was the man who saw that we need to quit England, become a separate country. But he did not have the skill set, or no one would have the skill set today, 100 years after Gandhi's death, not 100 years, 80 years after his death. Muslims and Hindus are still at war with each other. And he could not have solved that. So he took the bullet for just separating India from England, and then the division to east and west of India, separate country for Muslims. Even that is not really working. I do not blame Gandhi, but I also realize that it's so mired in both of our confusion, misunderstanding, even Indian friends, that I kept away from it. I purposely left that out of the conversation. So when I said the personal is political, the political is personal, even that could not be separated so easily. The criticisms were that he was criticized for using derogatory language against the Zulus, the blacks of South Africa. He was criticized, which the Black Lives Movement took up, and there was a lot of vandalism of statues in England, in Ghana, and here in 90 miles from where I live. So that I also took into account as I wrote about. And then there was this tawdry criticism of his sexuality, of a friendship, a really close friendship with a gentleman he knew in South Africa. There was a book by Joseph Lelyville, the former New York Times columnist. His book was banned in India. And at some point I made the joke that if I bring this up, maybe my book will be banned in India, and that might be good publicity, but it was very tongue-in-cheek line. But these were issues that any living human being will face if they're going to take the front line, if they're going to be the avant-garde of a new way of thinking. They're going to take criticism. I thought some of the criticisms were petty, especially the suggestion that he might be gay seemed very petty and Indian-ish. The point about him talking about Africans in a derogatory way. He was very young at the time. I compared it to when I was very young and grew up in a very white community, and there was an us and them attitude. That changed in me in my early 20s when I had some experiences in the African American community. It takes the experience to, change people. I often think of these protest movements, let's put them in situations. Let's put the people who feel superior to the underclass and put them in a deprived experience where they can't get work, they can't get help, and then have them come around and talk to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe Gandhi himself was becoming Gandhi. I mean, we're all becoming, as you say, and why should he be any different? Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And so I think we'll sort of wrap up now. Maybe a kind of final question, then I want you to sort of tell us where we can get the book and, direct us to your website and things. But I haven't read your book on the Buddha, but, you've done something similar, I take it. You've found a figure and then how would you, these are two gigantic figures, of course, and really different kinds, but is there like a key takeaway from your writing of the Buddha book and a key takeaway from this book that you can share that you'll always have with you? You're experimenting as you're thinking about the book, but then here you are a bit later. What has stayed with you?
Well, to go first to my first reaction, I was thinking of what my next book could be. Who could be the subject of my next book? And I was talking with an editor friend the other night, and we were thinking, what kind of profiles could I do about people who I look up to and admire, currently or within the last 100 years? And there are very few. So my takeaway somewhat is these people, Jesus, Gandhi, Muhammad, the Buddha, these are rare human occurrences. Mm-hmm. And the more we can learn and read about them, the more it adds to my collective knowledge, and they're tools that are now embedded in me that I can invoke. Well, there is a little thing on my kitchen refrigerator. What would the Buddha do? And in this last book, I was asking, what would Gandhi say? What would Gandhi say about the situation now? So just asking those questions is to, enlighten you a bit and make you think, how could I be Gandhi-like, or Buddha-like, or Jesus-like? We just had Easter, so and for the whole weekend you can see great movies, the life of Jesus, and they're not just movies, they are lives. So these, and I can say this, Craig, the thousands of people I've interviewed around the world over the course of my 40 years as a journalist have all come into me, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's that. These influences have changed my perspective on myself and people around me, and people around me now who I knew when I was a kind of comic, sarcastic young guy in even my 30s, growing up in the New York, New Jersey area, sort of in the air. I've changed. I've softened. I've lightened. I'm more accepting. And it's because of those guys. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Tell us where we can get your book and where we can find you online.
Becoming Gandhi, My Experiment, Living the Mahatma's Six Moral Truths in Immoral Times, is in, as the saying goes, in independent bookstores around your community, if it's still there. You can find 3 ways to buy my book. If you go to my website, it's www.perrygarfinkel.com. And it's available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, through the publisher, Sounds True. And I'll just say one more thing. I don't know how widespread your podcasts go out, but it's also been published in India, Germany, Portugal, and it's coming soon in Brazil. So if you speak those languages, it's there too. I really appreciate you having me on, and I feel like we could continue this. I should come back.
I'm sure we could. Well, thank you, Perry. This has been really good, really enlightening. So thanks again.